This is a group of lawyers who can really focus on leveling up the playing field for a population that frequently isn't even on it. They're not even on the playing field.
The men and women of legal services never forget why they work so hard in the first place.
Every case is about children and people who are having their dignity and restored, and a sense of hope. And so everything we talk about is about individual cases and people who have their lives restored because of the work of legal aid. There's a recent case where a child, a baby, needed a thymus cell transplant, and the state of Missouri would not give the transplant. The doctor, Pat Wolf, is an extraordinary person, and she advocated everything she could, but the state of Missouri would not give the thymus cell transplant to this little baby who would live with it or die without it. And so as Dr. Wolf said, legal aid lined up the heavy guns and said, the law requires you to do this. And the Medicaid did fund it, took care of the health, and we celebrated her first birthday at legal aid.
I think LSEM is sort of the conscience of the healthcare in Missouri. There are very few organizations that have really focused on holding the state's feet to the fire about doing what it's legally required to do.
Yet the list of problems that the poor face on a daily basis is almost never-ending.
The difficulties in education, of course, in housing, of course, in welfare, that people who are homeless have, always struck me as being the most serious cases in a society like this. The fact that we have homeless people has always astounded and even angered me.
But the biggest problems sometimes result in the biggest solutions that can affect a countless number of clients.
Back in 1985, people were sort of just discovering homelessness. And Dan Glazier, who's our current executive director, was an attorney in the housing unit in our program at that time. And working with the Washington University Law School Clinic, they came up with a state statute, an old state statute that dated back to 1815, that said that counties in Missouri had a duty to relieve, maintain, and support poor people within their borders. And Dan and the Washington University Clinic used that statute to sue the city of St. Louis, asking the court to enforce the right of homeless people in the city to some kind of shelter. That case ultimately resulted in a consent decree, a settlement, an order issued sort of by consent that established the homeless network of homeless services in the city of St. Louis. And that settlement sort of brought together city government, community agencies, and homeless advocates to establish a system of shelters and other kinds of social services in the city for people who were homeless.
In those days, the way landlords could evict a tenant from housing was to post a notice in the courthouse. Of course, the tenant would never get notice of that. He's not personally served, but all he had to do was post a notice that would say in what they called a rent and possession action that John Doe at such and such address is hereby notified that he's going to be evicted and the case will be heard 3 weeks from now. Well, of course, John Doe would never show up because there was no notice.
A young lawyer named Richard Barron took up the cause and brought the case to the Missouri Supreme Court.
And the Missouri Supreme Court overturned that action. So that one act by Barron, legal services lawyer, had this, affected thousands and thousands of cases. No longer could you, in this unfair way, evict a tenant.
In different areas, the problems that people confront are quite different. There, in my mind, no question that African American clients in the urban areas face a multitude of problems that arise from poverty, that arise from discrimination, and crime, the crime rate in the city, the poor educational system in the city of St. Louis, for example. That's an issue that those clients face that often it's a different issue in the rural area, though. So, for example, in the rural area, there's less access to services because there are transportation issues in the rural area.
Missouri was one of only 2 states in the whole country, along with Alabama, that did not have a non-emergency medical transportation program. And every year, the Department of Social Services would make a request to the General Assembly saying, we need funding for a non-emergency medical transportation program. They would say in their budget request, people cannot get to their cancer treatments, cannot get to dialysis, kids can't get to preventative health care without this transportation, and would document that this cost leads to more expensive emergency care down the road.
And one of our clients was from Northeast Missouri, up outside of the Hannibal area, and we went up to meet with her and interview her, and went out to her house, which, believe me, it was practically a lean-to on the side of a barn almost. And she described to us, I will never ever forget it, having to extract one of her own teeth to relieve the pain that she was having, because there was not a way for her to get to a dentist to treat that tooth.
We have rural clients, and rural clients across the state could not get to the doctor. It's a right without a remedy. If you can't get to the doctor, you have no Medicaid.
And then we were able to show with the state's own budget request that they had asked for this money. And so ultimately that case, in response to the case, the state started coming up with a way to do this, and the money was approved and the case settled. But that non-emergency medical transportation system now endures today.
And the staff of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri has even gone as far as to help those who are not part of the community they serve.
We were involved in a case down in the Boot Heel in southeast Missouri, helping out a sister legal services program, Legal Services of Southern Missouri. They had an apartment complex, a 50-unit apartment complex, that the housing authority was proposing to vacate and demolish, even though the place was virtually 100% occupied. And we were able to secure what is the first federal appellate decision in the country to hold that the demolition of subsidized housing can have a disparate, discriminatory impact on the basis of race in violation of the Fair Housing Act. So that public housing authority now is under a court order to get those units of housing fixed up and back online, and they'll have to be online and serving low-income people for the next 20 or 30 years.
The day-to-day service work is critical, and that's what we do, but the impact work is also something that needs to be emphasized as well, because if you can help 10,000 clients instead of one at a time, that's a good thing to do.
Whether helping one person at a time or thousands, the staff of Legal Services has worked to change the lives of the poor for the better in countless ways. And as long as there is a need, they will continue to do so.